the May the 18th. I was looking for the date on my paper, but it's May the 18th. Sorry, I was thinking of the date rather than the month. Mid-May, mid-second quarter as well. I'd like to welcome Narendra Taneja, India's leading energy expert, Sara Al-Akbar, chairperson and CEO of OilServe and non-executive director of Petrofac, and Randall Muhammad, MD of Petro Industrial in the US. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. Randall, let's start with you. All eyes on a lot of things these days, but one is the Fed chairman and what's happening in the US with the whole campaign of trying to temper inflation, and Chairman Powell saying overnight, prepared for more pain or as much pain as it takes to bring this inflation down. Is there really any chance that inflation can be brought down to 3-4% at this point?
Hi, good morning, Diala. Good morning, everyone. Look, so that's a good question. You're correct. The Fed chairman said there's going to be a lot of pain in the coming weeks or the coming months. As you know, at the end of April, inflation hit record highs. We were 8.5% year on year. We did see a retreat of 0.3% at the end of April. Obviously, there's a little bit of relief, but I don't think it's anything to really smile about. I think the inflationary pressure is going to be with us for some time. And I agree that the Fed is, I would say, desperately trying to bring that rate down. But as you know, Diala, what is happening is that they're using conventional tools to really combat what I think is an unconventional and a very complex problem. On one half of the equation, you've got excess liquidity. So, increasing interest rates by 50 plus basis points, tapering asset buying can deal with that. But I think the bigger challenge is on the other side, which is the constraints on the supply side. You've got food shortages, and of course, you've got the upward pressure on oil prices, which is putting pressure on fuel prices. As you know, the national average in the US is just over $4.4 per gallon. In Florida, we are paying $4.5 per gallon. So look, there's a lot of pressure at the pump, and you're going to see that translate into jet fuel prices as well. Ticket prices have gone up. Jet fuel prices have gone up. So I think, look, as we approach the summer driving season, we are not going to be happy campers. And as we approach the midterms, certainly the Biden administration is under tremendous pressure to bring this inflation down.
And I mean, you mentioned jet fuel. Those prices are out of control. We're seeing it, as you said, translating into ticket and holiday booking prices and gasoline. But we had somebody on the show earlier this week who said that $10 a month difference in the pocket of an American isn't going to stop them from driving and isn't going to temper that demand for gasoline, let's say. What do you make of that? I mean, the Fed, is basically now its policy is we need to do everything we can to bring demand down, okay? But despite these rising commodity prices, we're not really seeing demand destruction yet in the US, are we? So when would you expect that to kick in, if at all? Employment is still at all-time highs. Things are booming.
Yeah, look, it may appear that way, but I guess you gotta separate it. To the average American, I think they are feeling the pain. Even the middle class, to a certain extent, will feel the pain. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, people, the United States is a driving society. That's what we do. We get in our cars and we drive. But what I have observed over the last couple weeks and months is that there are fewer cars on the road as people either stay home and work from home, or they use the public transport. But what has drastically changed is that people have reduced their speeds. I'm seeing cars that are driving at a lower speed, especially on the highways. So I
Okay.
think people are feeling the pain. You know, and
Okay.
of course, as the driving season comes upon us, I think this is where you're going to see the real demand destruction.
Okay, Narendra, let's go to you, another big consumer of gasoline and fuels, India, certainly feeling the pinch of high oil prices for the last few months, and yet, as you've said before, you know, India has to keep going, its economy has to keep going. We're going to keep consuming, and perhaps taxes need to come in, and or the government has to come in and make up with subsidies at the pump. But, you know, how much pain is India in right now? You're taking a lot of discounted Russian oil, as China is, unlike the rest of the world, which usually takes Russian crude. Is that easing the pain at all?
Well, the pain is there. The prices are high at petrol pump, and for the ordinary consumer, they have to increase their budget for their monthly consumption of petrol and diesel and cooking gas and so on and so forth. But at the same time, you see, things are moving forward. I won't say booming, but you can also say that. Like, for instance, just 6 weeks ago, Delhi airport, where I live, was the second busiest airport in the world, more than even Dubai. People are traveling. Airports are chock-a-block. You can't find tickets. I'm talking domestic travel. Overseas story is more or less the same. Roads are full of cars and trucks and motor vehicles and so on and so forth. Despite the fact that the temperatures in northern part of the country are as high as 49 degrees Celsius, but still, economy is doing fine. Things are moving. New companies are being formed, and economy is expanding. But so is inflation, because petroleum prices are very high. Coming to Russia, that are we buying cheap oil from Russia? In India, we don't know about it. We keep reading about that in the Western media and probably even in the Middle Eastern media. In India, we don't know. Are we really buying cheap oil from Russia? How much? We have never bought more than 2% of total requirement oil from Russia. There are logistics problems. There are other payment problems. There are insurance problems. You can't find tankers, so on and so forth. Russia might have made this offer. We might be buying a little bit more than before, let's say 300,000 barrels. We consume 5 million barrels of oil every day. If out of that we buy 300,000 from Russia, 300,000 barrels, I mean, it doesn't really count. So, but still we keep on reading in Western media, and we keep hearing from Western political leaders as well that India is buying cheap oil from Russia. They might be doing that. This story is not a reality in our part of the world. But we do see that they keep on making these offers, and that's fine. But you see, buying oil is not only buying it cheap. There is insurance cost, there's transportation cost, there is risk cost, and we have diversified our supply, spread across the world as part of our energy security doctrine. We're not going to change just because Russia is offering $10 discount, $15 discount overnight. That's not how things work. Energy is crucial to India's economic stability and economic progress. So we look at things very differently, but somehow we keep reading in the Western press. Probably they create something, only they can answer your question.
Okay, well, we'll come back to you, Narendra. I want to talk about food prices as well, and the recent announcement that India is not going to export wheat, or it's going to reduce its exports of wheat. Sarah, good morning again. Sorry to go to you last but not least, Sarah Akbar. Let's talk a bit about crude oil going to Asia, to countries like India and China. Is there any concern amongst the Gulf producers, do you think, growing, that its crude is slowly being displaced by cheaper Russian oil? I mean, Narendra is saying the volumes aren't that significant. Is there any concern there in terms of how the Gulf is managing, obviously, this whole market and in the current context?
Well, good morning, Diana. As you know, the margins between supply and demand are really narrow. So even with the full capacity of Russia, if it was in the market, we still would have very narrow margins between supply and demand. So there is no real worry, because we do, most of our oil in this part of the world sell on long-term contracts, which are in place for the next, I don't know, some of them 10 years, some of them 15 years, depends when they were signed. So from that aspect, the quantities that we already have targeted markets for certain refineries, I don't think there are risks in those areas, and really we are really not worried about displacement of any type of crude. But the difference here is only in the spot market. The oil that is in excess that goes into these, day-to-day kind of transactions. And that's, I think, most of the crude that is coming from Russia to this part of the world now is diverted because of that type of market. So, and I didn't hear any of the officials in the region worried about losing the Indian market or the Chinese market or the Japanese market. These are long-term contracts in place, and they're just going.
Well, what about the worries then by Gulf producers about where the current oil price trajectory is going? Most analysts are saying the only way is up. Still, we're comfortably above 110, and they see further price increases. Any concern there in terms of an impact that it may have on OPEC policy going forward, the producers' policy of trying to temper this? What's the risk for them, if anything? Gulf economies are booming, all looks great.
Well, you see, I think OPEC over the last two sessions, they reduced their forecast for demand. So they are expecting this demand to come down. That's where they think the price will still stay around the 100, 110, and it's not going to go to the 160, 170 that I don't know who forecasted, but I saw that in some of the forecasts that, you would have these spikes going to 160, 170. But I believe the way OPEC sees it at this point in time, that the demand will come down a little bit and it will cool off. And then as a result, you will see that this balance, this price will stay. So the range they talk about all the time, I see in most of the, the documents is about between 80 and 110, no more than that. Some scenarios go above that, which are really disturbing because they know that those kind of pricing, every other single source of energy becomes extremely competitive, and it will expedite moving into those energies, nuclear being, wind being, renewable being, whatever. But for the short term, like the next 3 to 5 years, I don't think anything will catch up with the demand on oil.
Randall, let's talk a bit about gas. Prices again very high, and Europe, the pressure Europe is under now in terms of trying to find a way out of its dependence on Russia immediately and going forward. We saw the US and Europe in the last few days talk about Europe planning to take more gas from the US, a bit of a U-turn there in terms of recent historical policy. What do you make of that? Is that something that will stick, or is it just a panic short term because of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, even before even prior to the war, and even if you go back to the Trump presidency, you saw where the US was really trying to boost LNG exports. We saw President Trump sign an executive order to increase the export permit to 2050. So, even prior to that, the US was on this drive to sort of push gas molecules into the export market. And we saw new players like Global Ventures come on stream. We are seeing new LNG plants down in Louisiana reach final investment decision. So look, the US is definitely bent on becoming a net exporter of gas. Certainly, we've got the molecules, we've got the liquefaction capacity to do that, and I think there's a market out there that we can capture. Now, if you look at what is happening on the ground, the rig count is coming back slowly but surely, not at a quick pace as we've seen, let's say in 2013, 2014. But when I had a look at the Baker Hughes,
why is that? I mean, why are we still? Shale has been dragging its feet the last year, as oil prices got more, commercially viable for it. Why is just a physical limitation? Basically, they just can't get supplies, etc. Is that why it's not coming back?
I think that's part of the story. There's shortage of labor, there's shortage of raw materials, and generally costs have gone up. But don't forget that these producers have been really focused on returning capital to shareholders. I think they've done a good job so far. When that period is over, I don't know, but certainly if you look at the rig count report, we have added rigs at an average of 7 rigs per week since the beginning of January. So if you were to forecast that into the future, you're looking at probably more than 900 rigs by the end of the year. That's going to exceed the number of rigs that we had in 2019, right? Obviously, it's still far from what we had in 2014, which was over 1,800 rigs. But nevertheless, US production has inched up to about 11.8 million barrels per day since the pandemic. So yes, Diala, slowly but surely.
And Biden's certainly doing his best to open up any possibilities for that sector again, in his desperation to bring oil prices down. Narendra, just back to you. Let's talk about inflation and commodities. And oil prices are where they're at. We've talked about that before in terms of, and you're saying India's economy is still booming ahead, having a current challenge, obviously, with its heat wave. And part of the reason, I believe, why it backtracked on wheat exports this week was because of that it needs the local prices of that are going up, etc. Global price of wheat is going up as well. As a result, can you explain why India has done that, having just a few weeks ago said it would be trying to help the world with what's happening with food prices, and where does that leave you?
Well, as you know, that we are an important exporter, but commodity prices have been going up since Ukraine crisis, and we are a huge population, and our agriculture is still heavily dependent on the mood of the monsoon. If monsoon is good, we'll always have a bumper crop, especially of wheat. So it depends a lot on that. I think this is just a precautionary measure on the part of the government. And this is not something permanent. This they have done, and they might change it again in a week or the week after when the situation is stabilized. We are a heavy importer of, cooking oil and other things. Indonesia, as you know, had put a ban on export of palm oil and a couple of other similar commodities. So you say, the entire world is going these kind of challenges, but it's not a policy decision. It's just a kind of practical decision taken for the time being. Again, why we remain committed, of course, being part of the free world and free economy. I mean, even yesterday, the government announced all the old commitments made by companies and the government in terms of, a wheat export would be honored. And there might still be another window that is government to government export. Because we have surplus wheat available in the country, and we are a big producer of wheat. So, but at this stage, the idea is to make sure food is available to everyone in the country, within the country. And because inflation is going up, as you know, and petrol prices are going up, commodity prices are going up, huge challenge. This is a precautionary measure, nothing more.
And what is the government doing about those other prices then? As you said, petrol's going up, food prices are going up. From a sort of monetary policy, we talked about the Fed earlier. Is there any direction there being given of any change in policy from the central government in terms of what it's doing to manage inflation domestically?
Well, you see, we are a federal structure, as you know, so various state governments, they have come out with their own initiatives. The federal government has come out with their own initiatives to unburden the ordinary, consumers, especially when it comes to essential commodities and so on and so forth. But there are many things we have no control over, such as petroleum prices, which, as I said, form a very important part of the household budget across the country, whether you're very rich or you're very poor. So the government is not able to do very much except to kind of stabilize taxes and so on and so forth. But that's a huge challenge. I mean, as an Indian, as a big consumer, we are quite worried that on the one hand, ordinary consumers in countries like India and across Africa, many other geographies is suffering. And at the same time, we see the tsunami of, petro cash profits going in the direction of Middle Eastern kingdoms and even the United States. So what kind of global order we have got, especially the energy order? There seems to be no order. It's all chaos. It looks like medieval ages when, for instance, 2/3 of the people suffer, and there is a small number of countries, they're just basically, celebrating this tsunami of cash flow. So I think we need to this is energy emergency in the world, especially when it comes to look at it from the consumer's point of view. And I think world need to put their head together to find a solution. This is extremely unfair what's happening. 2/3 suffering and 1/3 enjoying these piles and mountains and mountains of cash.
And the 1/3, not all of them, but Sarah, obviously in the Gulf, all these windfall profits. I mean, both IOCs privately, but also the NOCs clearly having a bonanza there. We have a related question on when will the oil market be back in balance in terms of demand and supply. If everyone, we have the end of this year, end of 23, and sometime in 24. Sarah, I mean, we talked about this earlier, but again, these windfall profits that the NOCs are making, we've heard a lot about the plans of what they're going to do with those revenues in terms of energy transition, etc. But is it, are we going to see any adjustment in OPEC's policy in the next few months if this situation continues? A lot of countries are in pain. Gulf producers will be able to do more about it with supply. Any change of heart there? Even if we see demand destruction.
Let me start with saying, Narendra, please, you put a ban on exports of wheat. We don't eat, wheat is not our main diet, but rice is. So please don't go near rice because we will starve to death, right? We are wholly dependent on rice that comes from India. And this is all what I want to say is there is a balance. Yes, we are having some good time now because finally we are balancing our budgets. So every country in this part of the world, for the first time, they can actually balance the budgets and look a little bit positive. You see the surplus, little bit surplus in Saudi, little bit surplus in Kuwait. But genuinely, over the last few years, since 2014, we have been suffering like hell. So yes, I don't see the fairness in what's happening in the world today, but you cannot see it from perspective from one day. You have to look at it from a perspective of a long time. And these countries are wholly reliant on one product, and that is oil. So this is their opportunity to restructure their economies, and most of the countries in the region, those who actually have good governance and trying to diversify in order to not be in this position again where we are waiting for windfall profits from the oil to build our countries. So please don't go near rice. So anyhow,
the market being back in balance from a supply point of view, Sarah. One of those suppliers that the market will rely on is the Gulf. Perhaps Iran will come in again, and US shale, Randall was mentioning, perhaps next year. But again, your view on that question, when do you think we'll see the market back in a healthy balance from a supply point of view?
The reality is that today we are really not balanced. The margins are very close. We have inflation. We started this discussion. We have inflation fears everywhere, which will drive to some kind of recession, which will affect demand for sure. So the balance is narrow there. It will go forward. So my response to you, I don't see there is any kind of balance in this market before 24-25, because currently many of these countries are trying to rush to invest into the oil and gas to enhance capacity. You saw Saudi announcing 13 million, Iraq is announcing 6 million, but the investments are being made now to achieve those levels. They will come in 26, 27, and that's when you have that. So going back to the point on OPEC, there isn't much they can do at this point in time to control prices. They don't have any surplus that they're keeping in their back pocket to put into the market to ease off this demand.
And what would we have done if China had continued to import oil as it was a year or two ago, Sarah? I mean, we've really left ourselves in a very tight squeeze, and by all accounts, within 3-4 months, China may be back.
But let me tell you, the world really finds their way and their balance. So yes, you are absolutely correct. If China continued to import oil at the same levels, we would have really been in bad shape at this point in time. But look at the market over the last 20, 30 years. There is always something that happens that compensates for other things, one time Iran is out of the market. That's why the oil price stays at that level. One time Nigeria is out of the market. One time is Libya. So the geopolitics govern this market for a long time, and it is continuing to do so. Now the economic metrics of the world are in control, but we cannot ignore again the geopolitics of Ukraine, Russia, and the war and all. But the world always finds the way to balance and to survive and to continue.
Randall,
That has been the history.
Talking about geopolitics, but let's talk about domestic politics in the US. So there's your answer. When will oil market be back in balance? That's quite a balanced response, but end of 23 seems to be the majority. Yeah, we'll still have another year and a half to wait. Of course, I mean, the Russia-Ukraine war threw a spanner in the whole works, and it's causing a lot of volatility on all fronts. Biden, has been trying to desperately get the Iran deal signed earlier this year. Now you've got the midterms coming up, but he's trying to ease sanctions on Venezuela, whatever it takes. Do you think there's any chance that he can push that deal through with what Iran is asking for, or should we just dismiss that for the next few months?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's hard to predict that one. But certainly he's going to try his hardest to push that through before midterms, because that's going to score some political points. Yeah, I think the other win could be Venezuela. I think you had posted an article about Maduro and the opposition getting together in talks, and the US actually easing some sanctions on Venezuela. I believe there was talk about easing sanctions on a key PDVSA official as a first step with Venezuela. Now, the thing is, Venezuela is not going to be a magic bullet. Venezuelan production has dropped significantly. Venezuela needs significant investment to bring that production back to where it was in its heyday. So I wouldn't really look to Venezuela in the short term. That's going to be more on a 8, 10 plus years basis before we can see Venezuela do anything. I think the lower hanging fruit would be Iran. Iran has something like 100 million barrels of floating oil, as well as probably 1 million or 2 barrels of production per day that can come onto the market. So if I were to prioritize, I would definitely have my sights on Iran.
Narendra, we'll let you have the last word in terms of looking forward, projection for India's economy in terms of growth and GDP expectations as we stand today, with all that we're seeing with inflation and high oil prices, specifically energy prices for your country. Where's the latest perspective on the outlook for the economy? It's busy, but where's real growth considering where inflation is today?
Well, good question. You see, inflation is very high, unemployment rate is high, and huge challenges for an economy of our size and of our characteristics. So, but that said, at the same time, when you travel across the country, a lot of enthusiasm. There are challenges. People do talk about challenges, but people are talking more of opportunities. So I think that's what basically is India for you. So, but my own sense is, and that's backed by data from IMF and World Bank and various organizations, this year probably we are going to, deliver roughly 8% GDP growth, which for an economy of India's size is massive and very significant, not only for India, but for the entire region and Asia, actually. So I think a lot of optimism, but what is important at the same time that the oil prices don't go beyond where they are today. And therefore, you see, as I said, I disagree with my friend Sarah. Simply because you can't compare oil with wheat. Wheat is produced by our farmers, and we have never been in a wheat exporting country. We are not known for it. Our big exports are IT services, jewelry, diamonds, and actually, Sarah will be surprised. Third biggest export from India, petroleum products. We export petrol, refined products to 106 countries around the world. That's a major contributor to our economy. So, therefore, for us, what is important is the oil prices are in the region, which are good for countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, but good for big consumers as well. Right now, what's happening, there is roughly, my estimate is $25 per barrel is Ukraine, premium. And if Sarah is happy, others are happy because the prices are up, economies are doing better. But look at what cost. The country got destroyed for you to get it. Millions suffered, millions of refugees, thousands have been killed. That's what basically it costs for oil prices to go up where they are, and celebrations, if there are celebrations in the Middle Eastern countries, oil exporting countries. We don't want that. We want you to prosper. All exporting countries, their economic stability is important for big importers like us. We want them to be stable and prosperous. But windfall gains, these are like tsunami of profit. That's unfortunate, and we need to address that.
And I mean, India, as you said, there's $20 of it perhaps being factored in as a war premium. But not long ago you were saying $80 is really the maximum India can take, and it's managing.
Yeah.
Obviously with the $100. Randall, just back to you. We'll wrap up now, but just a quick question to you on pending the upcoming sort of US recession. Is there any real belief that that's going to happen? I mean, the Fed is struggling to temper inflation. And yet, we see the economy is sort of still booming, it's moving. Is there any real fear that we're going to actually see recession in the United States?
I think that's sort of the prediction from some corners. As you know, one of the red flags is what we call this inverted yield curve. And we've seen that inverted yield curve recently. And if you look back in history, that inverted yield curve usually was the predictor for recession. Now, obviously, it's not going to happen immediately. It's going to take, at least, 12 to 18 months to really see that kick in. But look, thus far, the Fed has raised interest rates by 25 basis points, then another 50 basis points, and we've got another 50 by plus 50 basis points to come. So, that in itself means that we're going to start tightening that liquidity, and that could trigger recession as we make the cost of borrowing so much more expensive. The impact really is going to be with, credit card debt, personal loans, and mortgages. This is where the Americans are going to feel it in their pockets.
And of course, companies are going to feel something there also in terms of their borrowings, etc. But at the moment, employment is looking very healthy. So unless that gets impacted, I suppose, it's still looking relatively healthy. We're wrapping up now. That's the end of our session. Thank you, everybody. We've just put up a slide there. An interview, halftime talk interview that's going to be aired in an hour here in the UAE at 12 UAE time. Again, we have a gentleman from Rystad Energy saying that he could see the oil market back in balance by the end of 2023, which is what 50% of our audience today agreed with. So it's a very good interview there. I'd encourage you all to listen in. Thank you very much to Randall and Narendra and Sarah for joining us this morning. Have a great remainder of the week. And bye-bye to our viewers. Thank you.